The unexpected ambush. The sun had barely risen on a calm Tuesday morning when the world changed forever. People were just starting their day, some heading to work, others to school, and families getting ready for a normal, peaceful day. Little did they know that the calm was about to be shattered by something no one could have ever imagined. It started with a strange, deep hum that echoed through the sky. At first, people thought it was just an unusual weather pattern, or a strange noise from nearby construction. But the sound grew louder and louder, and soon, it was impossible to ignore. People looked up, confused, trying to figure out what was causing it. The sky, usually bright and clear, was now filled with strange, dark shapes moving in an eerie formation. Suddenly, the ground shook. It wasn't a small tremor, but a powerful jolt that rattled buildings and sent people stumbling. The hum grew louder until it became a deafening roar. That's when the first of the alien ships appeared. It was massive, unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The ship was unlike the smooth, shiny designs of Earth's aircraft. It was jagged, dark, and seemed to flicker in and out of view, as if it was not fully there. It was the size of a skyscraper, with enormous wings stretching across the sky. In the distance, more ships appeared, each one larger and more terrifying than the last. There were dozens of them, filling the sky like a dark cloud of doom. People stood frozen in disbelief. Was this a military exercise? A new kind of weapon? But as the ships grew closer, the truth became painfully clear. These were not human-made. This was not a drill. This was an invasion. Panic spread quickly as the first explosions rocked the ground. Cities, schools, and streets were thrown into chaos. Buildings crumbled under the heavy blasts from above. Windows shattered, sending glass flying in all directions. People screamed, trying to find shelter, but there was no safe place. It felt as if the sky itself was coming down to destroy them. The world's leaders scrambled to respond. Military forces were mobilized, but it was clear that the alien fleet was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The ships were too advanced, their technology far beyond anything Earth had. Earth's weapons, even the most powerful missiles and defense systems, were useless against the invaders. Every attempt to strike back failed. No matter what was thrown at them, the alien ships remained untouched, as if they were invincible. The streets were filled with terrified people. Some tried to flee, while others stood in place, unable to move, their minds unable to grasp what was happening. News stations broadcast the images of destruction, but even the reporters seemed to be in shock. The world was united in fear, for this was not just an attack on one country or one city, it was an attack on Earth itself. The skies were filled with more ships as the aliens continued to descend. They didn't just attack with weapons, they unleashed a strange, powerful energy that disrupted electronics, knocking out communications and power grids across the globe. Airplanes fell from the sky. Cars stopped in the middle of the road. People on their phones or computers found themselves unable to connect to anyone. It was as if the whole planet was being disconnected from itself, isolated in a moment of terror. As the chaos spread, a strange calm began to settle over the world's leaders. They knew this wasn't a war they could win with force alone. But what could they do? They didn't even understand their enemy. Who were these aliens? What did they want? Why Earth? In cities, the once bustling streets were now eerily silent, save for the distant rumblings of alien ships moving above. Destruction was everywhere, but the invaders showed no signs of slowing down. It was as if they had come for a purpose, to wipe out humanity, to erase all of Earth's existence in the blink of an eye. The world had never faced an enemy like this, and there was no clear answer for how to stop it. In one of the cities most heavily damaged by the initial strike, a young woman named Sarah stood frozen, staring at the alien ships above. She had been in the park with her little brother when the first explosion went off. Now she clutched his hand tightly as they hid behind a crumbling building, watching the world fall apart around them. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest. What could they do? What could anyone do? At that moment, a voice crackled through a nearby radio, one of the few that was still working. It was a news reporter, his voice shaking with fear, trying to make sense of what was happening. "We are under attack. Earth is under attack by an alien force. We are helpless. There's nothing we can do." Sarah's grip on her brother's hand tightened as the sound of the explosion from above shook the ground once more. They were being torn apart, piece by piece. The world had no answer. The alien fleet had come, and no one knew why. What were they after? What could stop them? As Sarah watched the skies above, one thought ran through her mind. How could something so advanced be so unstoppable? What kind of power did they possess? And more terrifyingly, why did they choose today to strike? The first wave of the alien attack had begun, and Earth was left standing, unsure of how much longer it could survive. The story had just begun, and no one could predict how it would end. The first strike. As the world struggled to comprehend what was happening, the worst was yet to come. The alien fleet, already hanging ominously in the sky, shifted into formation. A low, mechanical hum resonated from the ships, vibrating through the air. The people below, still in shock, had no idea what was about to unfold. They were standing on the edge of an unimaginable catastrophe. Then, without warning, a blinding light erupted from the ships. It wasn't a flash or a burst of heat, but a wave of energy that seemed to radiate from every ship in unison. The light stretched down, slamming into the Earth's surface with a force that could be felt miles away. It wasn't just light. It was like a shockwave that cut through the air, the ground, and every building in its path. The first strike hit the largest cities. The entire skyline of New York, just moments ago a symbol of human achievement, crumbled into dust. Skyscrapers that had stood for decades disintegrated into ruins. There was no explosion, no fireball, just the sudden collapse of everything that had ever been built. The streets filled with thick clouds of dust, and the distant sounds of buildings collapsing were drowned out by the deafening roar of the alien weapons. In London, the same terrifying wave hit. Buildings exploded as though they were made of paper. People who had been walking down the street just seconds ago were swept away in a wave of destruction, their screams swallowed by the noise of the alien attack. The moment it happened, the world seemed to freeze. For a brief second, everyone stopped. No one knew whether they should run, hide, or scream. All they could do was watch as the world they knew was wiped away in an instant. Elsewhere, in small towns and rural areas, it was no better. The alien fleet didn't discriminate. The vast, open fields were filled with beams of energy that carved through the ground, ripping up everything in their path. Trees were uprooted, roads cracked open, and entire villages were reduced to rubble within moments. It was as though the earth itself was being torn apart, as if nothing could stand against the alien power. The panic that had been slowly growing now exploded. People ran through the streets, trying to escape, but there was no place to hide. The alien ships hovered silently above, moving in ways that defied logic, their weapons firing without warning. There were no escape routes, no places to seek refuge. The world's greatest army scrambled to respond, but their weapons were useless against the strange, incomprehensible technology of the invaders. The news channels, which had once shown calm reports of the day's events, were now filled with chaos. Reporters stood in front of cameras, fear in their eyes, as the destruction unfolded behind them. Their words were frantic, unsteady. We are under attack," one reporter stammered, his voice breaking. "This is not a natural disaster. These are alien ships. They're attacking us. We don't know how to stop them." As the alien fleet unleashed more strikes, the world's defense systems were rendered useless. The most advanced missiles, laser weapons, and anti-aircraft systems fell apart before they even had a chance to be launched. It was as though the aliens were reading the very movements of Earth's military, anticipating every move. No one knew what to do, And in those first few moments, the feeling of hopelessness hung thick in the air. The might of Earth's greatest powers had failed. In the midst of the destruction, a young soldier named Adam was stationed in a command center, miles away from the nearest city. He had seen his share of combat, but nothing like this. The radar screens in front of him were flashing with alarming speed. The alien ships, now clearly visible on the screens, weren't just in Earth's atmosphere. They were surrounding it. They were everywhere. His team worked frantically, trying to deploy countermeasures, but nothing seemed to work. Adam's heart raced in his chest as he watched the radar. It wasn't just an invasion. It was a coordinated, ruthless attack. They weren't here to take over. They were here to destroy. And they were doing it without hesitation, without mercy. In the middle of all the devastation, a single question began to form in the minds of everyone. Why were they doing this? Why had the aliens chosen Earth? Were they simply invaders, here to wipe humanity off the face of the planet? Or was there something more to this attack? What did they want from Earth? The world's leaders gathered in emergency meetings, trying to come up with a plan. But it was all in vain. The alien fleet was too powerful, too advanced. No matter what they tried, nothing seemed to slow the invaders down. Earth was on the brink of collapse. In every corner of the world, people huddled in fear. Parents clutched their children, trying to protect them from the falling debris. Soldiers fought bravely, but it was clear that Earth was no match for this alien force. The attacks continued relentlessly, each one more devastating than the last. By the end of the day, large sections of major cities had been reduced to rubble. The Earth's defenses lay in ruins, and the hope that humanity had once clung to seemed impossible to find. The aliens had struck with such force and precision that it felt like there was no way to survive. The planet had been ambushed, and humanity had no idea how they could fight back. As the dust settled, all that remained were broken buildings, ruined streets, and the haunting silence that followed the chaos. People still didn't know what had hit them. All they knew was that the world they once knew was gone, and in its place was the terrifying shadow of an enemy they couldn't understand. And as the alien fleet hovered above, it became clear this was only the beginning. The hero's emergence. In the aftermath of the alien attack, Earth was left in ruins. Cities were decimated. Governments were in disarray, and humanity was struggling to cope with the unimaginable destruction. The world's military had been rendered ineffective, and people everywhere were asking one question: who will save us? In the chaos, it seemed there was no hope, no hero capable of standing against the alien menace. Yet, in the quiet corners of the world, amidst the devastation, there was one person who would rise when no one else could. His name was David Turner, an unassuming man, no different from millions of others. He wasn't a soldier, nor a politician, or a scientist. He was just an ordinary citizen, living in the suburbs of a city that no longer existed. But David had always been different. In his youth, he had been fascinated with science, particularly the study of extraterrestrial life. He had never expected it to come to something real, something tangible. And yet, here he was, watching his world fall apart, knowing deep down that he was meant to do something about it. David had always been the quiet, introspective type, someone who was often overlooked. In his old life, he worked as a simple technician in a small research facility. No one ever thought much of him. His colleagues dismissed his ideas as overly speculative, his theories on alien communication just fantasy. But as the alien fleet descended upon Earth, something changed. Deep inside him, something clicked. One evening, as the alien ships loomed in the sky, David sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the flickering news broadcasts. The world seemed to be losing hope, and he knew that it wasn't just about surviving the destruction. It was about understanding the invaders, about finding out what they truly wanted. For some reason, he felt a deep, undeniable connection to them. The way their ships moved in the sky, the way they communicated, it wasn't just alien to him. It was familiar, like an old song he had forgotten but instinctively remembered. Suddenly, an idea struck him, one so powerful that it sent chills down his spine. What if he could communicate with them? He wasn't sure how or why, but he felt in his bones that he had the key to understanding the alien fleet. For all the advanced technology Earth had, it was clear they hadn't even begun to understand the nature of the enemy. But David had something no one else had, a strange intuition, a unique understanding of alien communication that he had developed over years of study. Without wasting a moment, he grabbed his old research notes and began to work. As the alien ships continued their relentless bombardment, David began decoding patterns in their movements and energy emissions. His heart raced as he realized that the aliens weren't just attacking. They were sending signals, transmitting a language that no one on Earth had recognized. He worked tirelessly, hours blending into nights, piecing together the strange symbols and frequencies the alien ships emitted. And then it happened. David cracked the code. The moment he understood the message, he could feel it deep in his soul. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning. The aliens weren't here to destroy humanity. No, their intentions were more complex than that. They were here because they were running out of time, and they needed Earth's help. They needed the humans to understand that a greater threat was coming, a force so powerful, so destructive, that the alien fleet had no choice but to act first. Earth was caught in the middle of a war between two alien factions, and they were desperate for assistance. David knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He had to act, and fast. But how could one man stand up to the alien fleet? How could he convince the world to listen to him when everything else had failed? For the first time in his life, David realized that the power wasn't in advanced weapons or military strategies. It was in understanding, in communication. He wasn't going to fight the aliens in the traditional way. No, David was going to do what no one had dared to try before. He was going to talk to them. But he knew the risks. The world had already been shattered by their invasion. If he failed to communicate, the consequences could be catastrophic. Yet, deep down, he felt an unshakable resolve. The weight of humanity's survival rested on his shoulders, and he wasn't going to let fear stop him. David gathered his research, and with the limited resources he had, began to build a makeshift communication device. It wasn't much, just a patchwork of old technology, and his newfound understanding of the alien signals. He knew it wasn't perfect, but it was his only chance. The rest of the world was out of options, and David understood this better than anyone. He had to be the one to reach out. As the world continued to burn, with alien ships hovering over the shattered cities, David activated the device. A strange hum filled the room as the machine powered on. The air seemed to shift, as if the world itself was holding its breath. David's heart pounded in his chest as he focused all his energy on the communication, sending the message he hoped would reach the alien fleet. For a long moment, there was nothing. No response, no sign that the aliens were listening. Doubt crept into his mind, but he refused to give up. And then, as if the universe itself had answered his call, a low, rumbling sound echoed from the device. It was working. The aliens had received his message. The room filled with static, and then a voice, unlike anything David had ever heard, spoke. It wasn't a language he understood, but there was a clarity in the tone, an emotion that rang through loud and clear. The message was simple. We are watching. You have a choice. Help us, and we will help you. Fail, and both of our worlds will fall. David stood still, his mind racing as the weight of what had just occurred sank in. He had done it. He had made contact with the aliens. And now, the real test began. Would humanity listen to him? Could he unite Earth's broken forces and form an alliance with the very beings that had brought them to the brink of extinction? The world was waiting for a hero, and David Turner had just emerged as the one they never saw coming. The hero's hidden power. The days following David Turner's contact with the alien fleet were a blur of tension and uncertainty. The world had been thrown into chaos, and yet, In the midst of destruction, something extraordinary was unfolding. David, once an unknown technician, had become the most vital figure on Earth. His message to the alien fleet had sent shockwaves around the globe, but now came the most difficult part: convincing humanity to trust him. As governments scrambled to understand the full extent of the alien warning, David found himself at the center of an intense global effort to communicate and respond to the invaders. In the eyes of many, he was their last hope, but others saw him as just another person caught up in the madness. Was he a hero, or had he unknowingly invited greater danger to the planet? Yet David wasn't afraid of the politics or the noise around him. What troubled him was something deeper, something he hadn't fully understood until now. Ever since his first encounter with the alien signals, he felt different. A strange awareness had settled into him, one he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the understanding of the alien language, it was something more. His thoughts were sharper, his senses heightened. It was as though the very act of making contact with the alien fleet had unlocked something deep inside him, something buried for years, something that went far beyond the realm of human capability. David spent sleepless nights trying to understand it. Was it just the pressure of being humanity's last hope, or had something more profound happened when he made that first connection with the aliens? It was as though their technology, their knowledge, had flowed into him, reshaping him in subtle ways. He could now read the alien signals with ease, but more than that, he began to understand their patterns, their strategies. His mind seemed to sync with their ways of thinking. One night, as David sat in a makeshift command center, staring at the blinking lights of his research, something unusual happened. The device he had built, the one that allowed him to communicate with the aliens, flickered to life without him touching it. The faint hum of the machine resonated through the room as the alien symbols flashed on the screen. But this time, they weren't just repeating the same messages. They were showing him something else, a vision. David blinked and rubbed his eyes, unsure of what he was seeing. The symbols morphed before him, creating a holographic image that hovered in the air. He gasped as the image took form, a massive alien city stretching across an alien planet. Towering structures, unfamiliar landscapes, and vast machinery all appeared before him, like a dream he could barely comprehend. But the vision didn't stop there. A figure emerged from the city, an alien being that was both familiar and strange. It was one of the invaders, but it wasn't the same cold, mechanical presence he had come to expect. This being was different. It was speaking to him, though it didn't use words. Instead, it communicated through emotions and images. The message was clear. The aliens weren't just desperate for help. They had been searching for someone like David for years, someone who could bridge the gap between their species and humanity. David had unlocked the potential to understand their technology on a deeper level, a connection that no other human had ever experienced. He wasn't just a communicator anymore. He was beginning to see the world through the aliens' eyes, to understand their culture, their fears, and even their weaknesses. David took a deep breath as the vision faded. His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of what had just happened sank in. He wasn't just some technician anymore. He was the key to Earth's survival. The aliens had chosen him, and in some strange way, they were offering him their power. He was being transformed by their technology, and it wasn't just a gift. It was a responsibility that no one else could bear. The following days saw David experimenting with his newfound abilities. He was able to tap into alien networks and technology with a mere thought. He could manipulate energy fields, communicate with their systems, and even predict the movement of the alien ships. It was as though the very fabric of their technology was embedded within him. What had once seemed like an impossible, distant enemy now felt more like an extension of himself. The world watched, unsure of what to make of this change. Some were afraid. How could one man hold such power? What if he couldn't control it? Others were desperate for answers. Could David be the key to defeating the aliens? Could he lead them into an alliance with the invaders themselves, as the aliens had suggested? But David's transformation was more than just an intellectual or technological shift. It was deeply personal. The more he understood the aliens' technology, the more he began to feel their emotions, their struggles. It wasn't just that he could hear them. It was as if he could feel their history, their pain. The aliens weren't just cold invaders. They were beings caught in their own battle for survival, driven by forces far greater than they could control. In a private moment, David spoke to the alien fleet again. He wasn't just trying to relay information anymore. He wasn't just a man asking for help. He was now a voice of compassion and understanding. He could feel their fear, their urgency. And for the first time, the aliens didn't just respond. They listened. They trusted him. David's power wasn't about defeating the invaders with weapons. It was about understanding them, about finding a way to connect in a way that no one on Earth ever thought possible. He was becoming something new, something beyond human. He was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for unity. And in that moment, he realized that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their military might, but in their capacity for connection and empathy. The world watched as David Turner began to step into a role they could never have imagined for him. The quiet, overlooked man had become humanity's most powerful asset, someone who could not only communicate with the invaders, but could shape the future of both species. And as David stood on the brink of something extraordinary, he knew that everything he had once believed about himself, about humanity, and about the universe had just changed forever. The clash of wills. The world had begun to settle into a strange kind of anticipation after David Turner's transformation. Humanity's hopes were placed squarely on his shoulders, and the alien fleet's presence, though still ominous, now seemed to stand at the edge of an uncertain alliance. David's abilities had grown beyond anyone's expectations. He had become the bridge between two worlds. Yet there was still one question that hung in the air like a thick cloud. Could David truly unite these two species? Could he stop a war before it even started? But as the days passed, a new and far more dangerous challenge emerged. The alien fleet had been in communication with David, but it was clear they were not as unified as humanity had hoped. There were factions within their ranks, different ideologies, different goals. The peaceful faction, those who had warned Earth, were desperate to seek an alliance. But there was another faction, a far more aggressive group, that viewed humanity as a threat to their survival. They believed that the only way to protect their species was to wipe Earth clean, to ensure no other civilizations could challenge them. And it was this faction, led by the alien warlord Varnak, that was preparing to strike. Varnak was a figure of legend among his people, a ruthless, calculating leader who had risen to power through sheer violence. Unlike the peaceful faction that had reached out to David, Varnak believed that only strength could secure the future of his people. He had little patience for David's attempts at diplomacy and saw humanity as nothing more than a potential threat. His forces were already beginning to mobilize, and with the power of their technology, they were poised to launch a devastating assault on Earth. David, now in the heart of the Earth's resistance efforts, was confronted with the overwhelming reality. It was not just a matter of communicating with the aliens. It was about stopping a full-scale war. The fate of humanity wasn't just in the balance. It was being decided by the clash of two wills, his and Varnak's. The moment of truth came when Varnak made his move. A small, powerful fleet broke away from the main armada, moving toward Earth at breakneck speed. Varnak had decided that the only way to win this battle was to destroy humanity and crush the peaceful faction that had hoped for peace. His fleet was equipped with advanced weapons designed to obliterate entire cities with one strike. But Varnak wasn't interested in destroying just the cities. He wanted to break the human spirit. He knew that if he could make humanity surrender in fear, Earth would never stand up again. David sensed the attack before it even happened. His connection with the alien fleet had grown so strong that he could feel the movement of their ships, even the slightest energy fluctuations. He knew something was wrong when a ripple of tension spread through the air. He rushed to the communication center, his mind racing, and began trying to reach the peaceful faction. But the message was intercepted. Varnock had already issued his orders, and David's warnings went unheard. The first strike came in the dead of night, with no warning. A flash of light lit up the sky as Varnock's fleet fired the first devastating blast. The energy waves slammed into the Earth's defenses, causing a shockwave that rocked the planet. Cities were leveled in an instant, and the global communication network went dark. The alien warlord had made his move, and Earth was once again plunged into chaos. But David wasn't about to let this go unanswered. He knew that he couldn't fight fire with fire. He had learned from the peaceful faction of the aliens that strength wasn't in weapons. It was in understanding, in breaking the cycle of violence. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He would have to confront Varnock face to face, using the power of communication, persuasion, and his newfound abilities to stop the bloodshed before it spiraled out of control. David reached out with his mind, tapping into the alien network. He didn't need to speak to the fleet directly. He knew how to send his thoughts into their command structure, into the mind of Varnock himself. What followed was not a battle of missiles or energy blasts, but a battle of wills, a battle for control of the future of two species. In the dark void of space, David's consciousness reached out to Varnock. The warlord's presence was overwhelming, like a storm of raw power and rage. Varnock's mind was consumed by his need to protect his people, by the belief that only through domination could his species survive. But David, despite the storm of emotions crashing against him, stood firm. "You don't have to do this." David's thoughts reached Varnock. "The peaceful faction has reached out. We can work together. Earth can help you. We can fight the true enemy. But this endless war will only destroy us all." For a moment, there was silence. Varnock's thoughts were cold, calculating, and filled with skepticism. "You are weak, human," Varnock replied. "Your species has shown nothing but destruction. You will fall, just like every other race that stood in our way." David's voice rang out, calm and resolute, despite the chaos swirling around him. "You don't have to fight us. You don't have to destroy us. I understand you. I understand your people. This isn't the way." For a long moment, David felt the warlord's mind seething, boiling with anger and distrust. But just as quickly, there was a shift. Varnock's presence wavered. David felt the warlord's doubt, the fear that had been buried deep inside him. Varnock's eyes were opening to the possibility of something else. The future was no longer certain. The tension between the two leaders hung in the air. It was a moment suspended between the desire for power and the hope for unity. And as David pressed further, gently, but firmly, Varnock finally relented, not out of defeat, but out of respect, for David's strength, for his ability to see the future that could be. The battle was not over, but the path forward had been cleared. Varnock, for the first time, hesitated, and in that hesitation, David saw a flicker of hope. The warlord wasn't invincible. He was driven by fear, just like everyone else. The clash of wills had begun, but it was far from over. The fate of Earth now rested not on the power of weapons, but on the fragile thread of trust and the strength of David's will to protect his world. The revelation. The tension between David Turner and the alien warlord, Varnock, had barely begun to settle when the true depth of the situation came to light. The Earth was not just a battlefield between two alien factions. It was the epicenter of a galactic conflict far beyond anything humanity had imagined. The war between the peaceful alien faction and Varnock's forces was just one piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. As the uneasy ceasefire continued, David worked relentlessly to build trust with both factions, carefully navigating the delicate line between peace and war. But as the days passed, his connection with the alien network deepened, and he began to receive disturbing, fragmented signals that he couldn't ignore. The peaceful faction, the ones who had reached out to Earth, had been hiding something. They hadn't been entirely honest with him. And now, with the alien warlord's forces halting their attack, David was beginning to understand why. Late one night, while working alone in the communication center, David's mind was suddenly flooded with an overwhelming message, one that didn't come from the peaceful faction, but from a hidden source within the alien network. This wasn't just a simple communication, it was a direct transmission. The voice that emerged in his mind was different. It wasn't cold and mechanical like Varnak's, but it carried a sense of urgency, of something ancient and unknown. "David Turner," the voice said, calm yet laden with an unspoken weight. "You have been chosen, but not for the reasons you believe. What you know, what you think you understand, is not the full truth. You are at the center of something far more dangerous than you can comprehend." David's heart raced. The voice continued, its tone now turning darker, more insistent. "The peaceful faction you have allied with, they are not just an independent race. They are part of something much older, much more powerful. They were sent to Earth not to protect it, but to use it. You are a key player in a game you don't understand. And the true enemy is already here." The words echoed in David's mind, sending a chill down his spine. What did it mean? The peaceful faction had been trying to protect Earth, right? Why would they deceive him? Why hide the truth? As David continued to probe the mysterious transmission, the voice revealed an even deeper secret. It wasn't just that the peaceful faction had manipulated Earth into joining their side. They had been watching humanity for centuries. The alien race, once a noble and peaceful civilization, had been slowly corrupted over time. A hidden war had raged within their ranks, and now the conflict was spilling over onto Earth. Their original mission, to protect weaker species in the galaxy, had evolved into something far darker. The peaceful faction had become the vanguard of a cosmic empire that sought to control, to dominate, and to absorb other species into their fold. Earth was not a simple target. It was a key to a much larger cosmic strategy. The peaceful aliens were planning to manipulate humanity into becoming their new soldiers, their new power source, their new weapon. But why? Why now? The transmission was clear. There was an even greater threat, one so powerful that it threatened not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. This was the true reason the peaceful faction had contacted Earth in the first place. They were desperate. There was a force far beyond any alien species David could understand, that was coming to the galaxy. A force that would destroy everything in its path, regardless of allegiance. David's mind reeled as the full weight of the revelation hit him. The peaceful faction was not as benevolent as they seemed. They had been hiding the truth from him, using him as a pawn in a much larger game, all while preparing for a war against an enemy so ancient and powerful that their very existence threatened the balance of the galaxy. It wasn't Varnak's faction that was the true danger. It was the entity that had been manipulating both sides. The warlord's forces were merely another distraction, a way to buy time while the true enemy prepared to strike. David sat back, his mind spinning. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted them? He had always believed the peaceful faction had humanity's best interests at heart. But now he was faced with the chilling realization that they had been playing a long game, a game with Earth's future as its prize. And David, the one person who could have united the alien factions, had become the unwitting tool of their plans. With the full truth now exposed, David knew what he had to do. The peaceful faction could no longer be trusted. He would need to find a way to expose their lies, to prevent them from using Earth to fuel their war. But he couldn't do it alone. David reached out to Varnak, sending an urgent message directly to the warlord. "We've been deceived," he said, his voice firm but desperate. "The peaceful faction is not what they seem. They've been using Earth as a pawn, and they are planning something far worse than a war. A force is coming, one that will destroy everything unless we stand together." For the first time since their uneasy truce had begun, Varnak's response was not one of aggression. David could feel the warlord's doubts, the skepticism, but also an undeniable glimmer of understanding. The truth was undeniable now. There was a greater threat, a common enemy that neither side could face alone. The clock was ticking. Earth's fate hung in the balance, not just because of the alien factions, but because of the ancient force that loomed on the horizon. With the revelation of the truth, David now understood what had to be done. To save humanity, to save the galaxy, he would need to unite the factions, both the peaceful and the warlords' forces, against the true enemy. But that was easier said than done. The battle for Earth had only just begun, and David's role was far from over. The revelation had shaken him to the core, but it had also revealed a path forward. The key to Earth's survival was no longer just about communication. It was about resistance, unity, and the strength to face a threat far beyond anything they had ever imagined. Earth's last stand. The truth was now clear. Earth was caught in a war far bigger than anyone had imagined. The peaceful alien faction, once thought to be humanity's saviors, had been manipulating them for centuries, while an even darker ancient force loomed on the horizon. The clock was ticking, and David Turner, humanity's reluctant hero, stood at the center of the storm. David had spent days in deep communication with Varnok's forces, negotiating an uneasy alliance. But this was not a war for dominance. It was a war for survival. Earth was not just fighting for its own existence, but was caught in a galactic struggle for the future of the universe itself. The ancient enemy that was coming was a being of unimaginable power, one that devoured entire civilizations, erasing them from existence like dust in the wind. With the stakes higher than ever, David made a bold decision. He would lead Earth's defense, but not as a soldier or commander. No, he had become something more, a unifier, a voice of reason in the chaos, a bridge between species who had never dreamed of working together. The peaceful faction, and Varnok's warlords, once bitter enemies, had now reluctantly joined forces under David's leadership. But their cooperation was fragile, built on a shared understanding that the enemy they faced was beyond anything they had known. David's first order was clear. They would need to combine their forces, not just in technology or strategy, but in their very understanding of the enemy. The peaceful faction had knowledge of the ancient forces' movements, while Varnok's warriors had the strength to fight back, to defend what was left. The two factions, with their wildly different philosophies, had to trust each other, or else both would fall. David stood at the heart of this new alliance, working with the greatest minds from both sides, blending their technologies, sharing knowledge that had been kept secret for generations. The alien ships, once dark and foreboding, now hovered over Earth as allies. The peaceful faction's fleets, sleek and efficient, worked side by side with Varnok's ships, their jagged, battle-worn forms a reminder of the brutal strength they possessed. Together, they began to prepare for the coming storm. But as the days wore on, David began to realize something that terrified him. The ancient enemy, a force known only as the Devourer, was not just an external threat. It had already infiltrated their minds, their communication, and their very sense of reality. Its power wasn't in its weapons, but in its ability to manipulate and control. It whispered in the minds of the weak, sowing seeds of doubt, fear, and betrayal. The Devourer didn't just want to destroy. It wanted to erase everything, to rewrite the fabric of existence itself. David knew the final battle would not be fought with weapons. It would be fought in the hearts and minds of those who dared to stand against it. The greatest challenge they faced wasn't defeating the Devourer, but holding on to their humanity, their beliefs, and their unity in the face of an enemy that could make them question everything. The night before the battle, David stood alone, gazing up at the sky. The alien fleet, now a symbol of unity, hovered overhead, ready to make its move. In the distance, a storm of darkness was gathering. The Devourer's forces, an endless tide of energy and destruction, were closing in. Earth had never faced anything like this before, and yet, despite the overwhelming odds, David felt a strange calm wash over him. He wasn't alone. The peaceful aliens, Varnok's warriors, and humanity had come together, each offering their strength, their skills, and their resolve. This was their final stand. No matter how powerful the devourer was, it could not break their will. They had come together, against all odds, and now they would fight for a future they all believed in. The battle began at dawn. The skies above Earth were split open by the roar of energy blasts as the combined fleets launched their assault. David, now in full command of the defense, coordinated the movements of both the peaceful faction and Varnok's forces, weaving them together in a way no one thought possible. His mind, now sharp and attuned to the alien technology, directed the flow of the battle with precision. He could feel the pulse of the conflict, the rising tide of desperation, but also the flicker of hope that burned within each soldier. The Devourer's forces were unlike anything they had seen, an endless wave of energy that devoured everything in its path. But David, standing at the heart of the battle, knew this wasn't just about fighting back. It was about standing firm, about refusing to yield to the darkness. The Devourer could destroy cities, planets, and entire civilizations, but it couldn't destroy their will. It couldn't take away their unity. The fight raged on for hours, the skies dark with energy and fire. Earth's cities, now fortified with alien technology, became the last bastion of hope. The peaceful faction and Varnok's forces fought side by side, their differences set aside in the face of a common enemy. The battle was brutal, but humanity's resolve was unshakable. Then, just as it seemed the Devourer would overwhelm them, something changed. David, with the full weight of the combined forces behind him, activated the final weapon. The culmination of all the knowledge he had gained from both factions. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but of unity. It was a signal, a burst of energy that resonated across the battlefield, sensing the minds of all those who fought with him. In that moment, the Devourer faltered. It had tried to consume them, to break their spirits, but it had underestimated one thing: the power of unity. The combined forces of humanity and the alien factions, standing together as one, unleashed a wave of energy that disrupted the Devourer's hold on reality itself. It was a final, desperate move, but it worked. The Devourer's power was severed, and its forces began to collapse in on themselves. The battle was over. Earth had won. But the victory wasn't just about survival. It was about something greater. In that moment, humanity had proven that no matter how dark the universe became, no matter how overwhelming the odds, there was always hope. There was always a chance to stand together, to fight for what was right, and to preserve the future. David Turner stood at the edge of the battlefield, surrounded by both alien and human forces. The sky, once filled with the darkness of war, was now clear. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, humanity stood as part of something greater. Earth had survived, not through strength alone, but through the strength of unity. David had done what no one else could. He had brought together enemies, forged an alliance, and led them to victory. The war was over, but the journey was just beginning. Earth had changed, and the universe would never be the same again.